So we are back for another video, and this one is probably going to be more eye-opening. Why we're talking so much about benefits of just daily habits that are linked towards living more as a primate. That's how I call it. So, and today's topic will be sun exposure and sunscreen benefits and risks, how to balance it all. So what would you say are the importance of sun exposure for health and well-being? And maybe we'll start from there and move on with that.
All right. So this is really neatly packaged in a actual study. So I'm just going to read the beginning of a study that tells you literally the importance of sunlight. So this first little section here is what I'm going to read, but the key point is what I have highlighted there. So when I get to that, I'll just make sure and emphasize what that actually means. So the skin, protective or barrier organ, is empowered with sensory and computing capabilities to counteract environmental stressors to maintain and restore disrupted I can't pronounce that word, it's called contagious homeostasis. In other words, your skin is tasked with the capabilities of doing a whole lot of really interesting things to keep you running effectively, not just from protection, but also restorative processes. These complex functions are coordinated by the neuroectoderm system that communicates in a bidirectional fashion to the central nervous system, the endocrine system, and the immune systems, all acting in concert to control your body's homeostasis. So here's the important part. Although UV energy has played an important role in the origin and evolution of life, UV absorption by the skin not only triggers mechanisms to defend the skin's integrity and regulate global homeostasis, but also induces skin pathology, i.e., cancer, aging, and autoimmune responses. These effects are secondary to the transduction of UV electromagnetic energy into chemical, hormonal, and neural signals defined by the nature of the chromophores and tissue compartments receiving the UV wavelength. So that little last part that I had a lot of bigger word in it, but basically this is what it means. The skin is designed to absorb UV light to dictate homeostasis responses and defend the skin against cancer and pathology. The thing that's secondary to those things is transforming all of that energy, all of that UV electromagnetic energy into chemical, hormonal, and neural signals. Neural signals meaning neurotransmitters. So in other words, your skin is tasked with not just defending, but also creating the chemicals within you: testosterone, insulin, dopamine, you name it. And we've already touched on some of these in previous episodes, right? We've kind of danced around, hey, it does these things. Now there's an actual study that was produced in 2018, so this is not that old, literally saying it does all of those things. It helps you create all your neurotransmitters, all your hormones, and all your other chemicals. And it's dependent on the tissue that receives the light. That's a key component. The tissue compartments receiving specific UV wave light is what dictates what happens in each one of them. That's why we say, hey, you got to get your face out in the sun. You got to get your eyes out there with no sunglasses. And it's because it's specific to the tissues. It's also why we say, hey, on your face, try not to wear sunscreen when you're habitually trying to get sunlight to create these things that are happening. Also, that leads to, you probably don't want to do it on the rest of your skin, because it's not just the skin on your face. All of your skin is designed to do that. This includes, hey, if you are somebody who never undresses their lower half, you might be more predisposed to colon cancer, prostate cancer, ovarian cancer, all of those, because you're literally, remember what this said at the beginning, it is tasked with the homeostasis and also induces pathology, cancer, and aging and autoimmune responses, right? And we talked a little bit about autoimmunity with sunlight into the gut and how that dictates autoimmunity through your brain-gut axis. So the skin and sunlight do all of these things. And the episodes that we've been putting together are just bits and pieces for individual parts of all the things that are happening, right? So today we're going to dive a little bit more global and a little bit more of a reason why you might want to think twice about sunscreen for lots of reasons that have to do with the hormone and neural signaling aspect of what I just read.
So how about risks associated with overexposure to sun? Because we hear a lot, hey, you're going to get skin cancer if you're doing this. And you know what I mean? You're going to get sunburned, obviously. Well, I'm lucky enough that I don't burn. And only time I have burns when somebody puts sunscreen on me. That's
okay.
Once in
that's
all my
true.
life, somebody put sunscreen on me, and next day my skin was just horrible. So what's happening there? What are the risks with overexposure to the sun?
Well, there's a little bit, it's called kind of like your monkey experiment that we were talking about before. If you tell somebody, and again, we've kind of experienced this in the last 3 years, if you tell somebody a half-truth over and over and over again, they're going to believe it at some point, and then they're going to go through with it. And then once they go through it with it, if you designed it well, they're going to keep going through with it. So first, I'm going to start with this. This is a study on malignant melanomas, that's skin cancer, okay? And it says it was reported that increased terrestrial light, UV light, back in 1975, coincidentally, that's when sunscreen started to get made, was showed to increase the risk of melanomas with more UV exposure. Again, that was one report in 1975, okay? This right here was in 2018, okay? So this study went back and actually looked, is this actually true, right? That's the other thing. People don't check up, right? Kind of like the whole COVID thing. Did the COVID thing, was it actually what everybody told us? Well, now we know 3 years later that in fact, all the people that were like called, what do you call it? Cynics, critics, conspiracy theorists, they were actually right? We know that now, but nobody goes back and holds people accountable. That's what this study has done. It's actually gone back and investigated this. And this is what they found. It said both Europeans, Americans in the same age groups have significantly increasing melanoma, malignant melanoma incidences with decreasing UVB doses. What does that mean? It means the less sunlight you get, the more your malignant melanoma incidences increase, which shows that UVB is not the main driver of malignant melanomas. This is a study in 2008 going back to look at the recommendation from a study that was probably funded by the people manufacturing sunscreen back in 1975. Okay,
it's very interesting.
Right away,
it brings me back to like childhood experiences where Soviet Union and all those kind of things, and everyone was working outside in a summer, 8-12 hours sun exposure, no sunscreen because there's no such thing, and you could rarely see anyone getting ill, or I had never heard of skin cancer to begin with there. Whereas you go to these more advanced countries and you have all kind of issues, but we kind of unwrap in that it's more directed to that they just don't get any kind of sun exposure anymore. Yeah. Getting in a car, driving to work, and then getting in a car to drive to gym is not really healthy to begin with. And now if you top it up with going on a holiday where you could literally increase your health maybe by being more in the sun, now you protect yourself from getting that sun. And maybe that's everything together thrown in that making people so damn weak. Would that be right assumption?
Yeah, not just weak. It's more of like it's almost like brainwashing, right? It's like brainwashing to the point where, hey, if I told somebody, and this is why we're doing this episode, people are contacting us and just voicing their opinion of like, well, what about the cancer risk? If I get more sun, my cancer risk goes up. This is an effort to show you that's not true. There are studies looking at it. What is causing the cancer? The fact that you are blocking all sun all the time, especially with sunscreens. That is in the name. They are blocking sunlight. And it even is more nefarious than that. I'll actually get into that a little bit, but I'm just going to demonstrate, just show another study here. It says cardiovascular disease, both in cancer and non-cancer patients, increases with decreasing sun exposure. And here is women with cardiovascular disease or non-cardiovascular disease that had melanoma or have melanoma. If they increase, here it is, increase active sun exposure habits, were estimated to have a 1 to 2 year longer life expectancy during melanoma in South Sweden study. So in other words, women with cancer already, skin cancer specifically, have a longer life expectancy if they start to actively get sun exposure. That's literally counter to the research. And this is anti-cancer research publications. This is literally looking into what we're talking about. Okay.
So these new studies are coming out, well, fairly recently, 5 years. Let's be honest, if it's published 2018, they probably started doing study in 2012 or something.
Yeah. And so actually it says right here, the study was finally concluded in June 2017. So yeah, you're probably right, probably 5 years before that. So 2012. But yeah, that's literally what it's showing. So how did we get to this point? Well, first you have to brainwash people. How do you brainwash people? By inhibiting their ability to think for themselves or recognize patterns of being lied to, right? Because media, speech, all of these things are all patterns, right? Like that's the reason why you can interpret the words coming out of my mouth are just patterns. That is significantly related to your dopamine level, right? And if you lower your dopamine level, you can't think as clear and you can't recognize patterns as clearly, right? Why am I talking about this? Well, sunlight directly increases dopamine. I'll get to that. Okay. And so I'll start with this little guy right here. Okay. So if you look right here at the far right corner, there's dopamine right there. Okay. It comes from these two amino acids, phenylalanine and tyrosine. Okay. Now, how do these get modulated into the first precursors for all of these? And we'll talk about them. It starts with mammalian photosynthesis, basically for sun exposure. It starts with sun exposure. Sun exposure is what starts to cleave these two amino acids into the precursors that eventually turn into your thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, and DOPA, which then gets broken down into melanin, your ability to tan, dopamine, your ability to think clearly and recognize patterns, adrenaline, the action hormone, and noradrenaline, a format of a non-stimulatory version of adrenaline. These are all interchangeable, these first three. So if I go like this can turn into this, and this can turn into this, and vice versa. This can turn into this and turn into this, right? But it starts way over here. This is the most important part. This kicks off the whole sequence of things. Now I'm going to tell you a very, how would I say, this is the sinister part about sunscreens. Okay. We start getting people, we feed them a lie, right? In 1975 of, hey, more sun creates more cancer. Here's some sunscreen to stop you from getting cancer. Great. They start using it. What starts happening? Well, here's a little known fact about sunscreens. Almost all of them at the beginning. There's some that are not, but we'll get to why that's still not good. They are all tyrosine inhibitors. Okay, that's a crucial part when you're trying to make dopamine. So if I block tyrosine, I do not make thyroid, I do not make melanin, I don't make dopamine. So it makes it hard for you to tan. It makes it hard for you to make thyroid, so you're not very active anymore, and it lowers your dopamine. That is a crucial point in brainwashing. If you lower their dopamine, all of a sudden they cannot recognize patterns. So they're not going to be able to recognize when you're lying to them or when you're telling them the truth. They'll just take you at face value because they have to. This is a non-conscious thing. Okay. So it's not something you're going to be able to fight through. You're literally just not making the neurotransmitter that allows you to think clearly. That's what I'm getting at. So the first stage in sunblock being bad for your health is not actually the blocking of the sun. It's the blocking of tyrosine.
Hmm.
Okay. And then we started the episode with this, right? Sunlight does all of these things right here, right? We started that episode of like sunlight literally does all these things. Well, sunlight creates this neurotransmitter, neurosignaling of dopamine. We'll block it so we don't make any more dopamine. And then if you happen to stop using it, we still block tyrosine. It's going to take a while for this system to get back on, right? So there you go. So now and so now with the concept of training in mind, right? How do you, evolve in training, right? If a novice comes to you, you're not going to give them a full-fledged program right off the bat. Basically, exactly going back to our very first episodes. You start with the basics and you increase the intensity over time and you do more over time, but you start with what's manageable, right? So if you're somebody who's using sunscreen all the time, again, now this leads us to the actual reason for the episode. If you're somebody that's using, fully clothed all the time, never going outside, or anytime that you do, you put sunscreen on, your skin is atrophied, just like any other muscle. It's atrophied. It is not capable of handling higher levels of stress. So how do you, if you believe what I've said, and I highly suggest you look into this yourself. But if you believe what I've said, then the key is, okay, how do I rectify this? How do I get more sun? How do I wean myself off of sunscreen without blistering and burning, right? And the first step is obviously stop using sunscreen, just flat out, because the key effect there is the tyrosine problem, right? So stop putting sunscreen on you. If you need sun protection, use clothes instead. At least it's not going to block tyrosine and inhibit your dopamine, because you have to think of the skin like a solar panel. If you only have a little bit of skin exposed, you'll still make dopamine, but you won't get blistered like all over your body and stuff like that, especially like forearms. Forearms tend to not blister because they're kind of always exposed, right? Unless you wear long sleeve clothing all the time. So you have to think of the skin like a solar panel. You just expose more skin over time to more and more sun. Start gradually. And I have even kind of, it's not even a development, it's just common sense of like thinking through logically of kind of like a hybrid tanning model. So if you're somebody that I just described, right, really atrophied skin, you start with the time of days that are not going to burn you ever. And that's the first 3 hours and the last 3 hours of the day. The reason why is because infrared light prepares the skin to receive UV light without burning. Okay. So in the morning, there's only UV or IRA light. And in the evening, same thing. As you get closer to the middle of the day, say from like 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., that's when UVA light comes in, right? And UVA light is less powerful than UVB, and UVB comes in the middle of the day. So if it's less powerful, that means it's less likely to create any kind of problems for you on the skin as you're training your skin. So the hybrid tanning model is you get outside early in the day, get some red light, and then sometime in the early morning, between 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. would be an acceptable time. You do it again. You get outside for 30, 40 minutes, if possible, whatever time, it doesn't really matter. The time of day is what matters more, because there's only UVA light, not UVB. And it's accompanied with infrared A. So you're conditioning your skin to become more sensitive to UV light and not burn. And the UVA light that you're exposing yourself to does all these wonderful things, but it's less powerful than UVB. So you're also not going to burn. So very low risk on the burning scale when you have atrophied skin, but very high reward on all the things we want to do. Right.
So you go to Bahamas or Mexico, make sure you are getting outside in early morning and late at night, and then midday cover up and don't use sunscreen as such, but maybe wear something light that protects your skin.
Exactly. That's exactly what I would do. I would go with light clothing, right? Even like a sundress is perfect, right? Like a sundress, so it covers most of your body, and then like a light see-through like a garment for your upper body, and or maybe a hat, right? That is way more better. Sorry, I said that wrong, but it's way better than putting sunscreen on for the reason of the tyrosine problem. And coincidentally, you're still going to have some skin exposed, but it's not going to burn because you've conditioned it. Remember, it starts with conditioning of exposing yourself to infrared light. Infrared light tells the skin what comes next. Remember, your body is an anticipatory organ. All of them are really, but skin is big time because of what it's charged with. It's charged with maintaining, restoring homeostasis for the whole body. So it's hyper anticipatory. So when it senses infrared A, it knows, oh, there's probably going to be some UVA light hopefully coming. And then you introduce it with some UVA light. And then it goes, oh, great, this is perfect. That means there will probably be some UVB light coming in a few hours. So it prepares itself for all these things, right? And if you do that correctly, your body is less likely to have a sunburn at all. And because it's preparing for the next steps, it's also upregulating the processes that are going to transform UV light into hormones, into chemicals, and into neurotransmitters. It's preparing to do that. So you're getting a lot of reward with very little risk. Now, for the extra, go ahead and say what you're going to say.
I was interested in the study designed for 1975 study. Were they looking for protecting your skin or protecting health?
They were looking at protecting your skin. They were just saying skin cancer is going up with sunlight. Right. They didn't look at any other health markers other than the burning of the skin.
Right. So it sounds like just flawed study, and downstream from that just have made everything probably worse.
Yeah. Very, very likely. Whether that's on purpose or not, I'll let you decide, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, so now we come back to, oh yeah, the extra, where is that? Here we go. So for the extra sensitive people, say you do this thing, the hybrid tanning thing, but you still end up with skin that's a little bit too sensitive. Now we're looking at nutritional intake. Another thing that I've introduced is, hey, fatty fish are something that brings so many things, right? Now we're going to add another one to the list, right? Before it was, hey, I've discussed how a DHA specifically is very protective. It lines, it becomes your cell membranes. It's protected in lots of ways. It lets you gather more solar energy. But when it gets broken down, right, when it gets used up, there are derivatives, right? It's a big it's a big fatty acid. And one of its derivatives is resin 1, okay? That's this guy right here. And here is a study looking at the treatment with resin 1, which is a docosahexaenoic acid derivative. That means that it's a DHA derivative, fatty fish omega-3 fatty acid derivative. Protects the skin from inflammation and oxidative stress caused by UVB irradiation. So in other words, if you're really sensitive still and you're doing the hybrid thing, it probably means that you do not have an omega-3 index that's acceptable to even handle that little bit of UV light that so in other words, your skin is so atrophied, you actually need to back up a little bit, maybe only get morning daylight for a little while you bring up your omega-3 fatty index, because this is only one of the constituents in fatty fish that helps protects your skin, and not just protects your skin, but also makes it more sensitive for the positive things that we talked about. It amplifies the ability to collect electromagnetic field information from solar light. And at the same time, when it gets broken down, this one derivative is shown to protect it. There's another thing in fatty fish, carotenoids. That's what makes salmon orange or pink. That's also what makes shrimp the color that they are, and other shellfish. It's carotenoids. One of them is astaxanthin. I think I said that right, but probably not. And that is a major anti-inflammatory and protective agent from seafood for the skin. It actually starts to form what's called a solar callus on your skin. It is a component in your body making a solar callus. And that makes it so that you probably already have a really excellent solar callus, since you've said you never use sunscreen and you never burn. So you have an excellent solar callus. And that's supposed to be present all the time. But if you don't eat fatty fish, seafood, you're not going to have the constituents to make it in the first place. And that's why if you find yourself doing this hybrid tanning thing and you find that I don't even expose myself to the middle of the day sun, but I still kind of get skin that's too sensitive, right? I get too red and it's not comfortable and I'm kind of afraid of burning. I would be too, because it's probably that you're lacking enough omega-3s in your skin to even be protective from the sun. That is a real reality. So the answer isn't put sunscreen on. The answer is up your omega-3 index until you actually have an adequate omega-3 index. Just for reference, a good omega-3 index is 8% and up. Most people that I've seen tested are at 5 or less. That's unacceptable. That's not only that, but having omega-3 index of an 8 and up also dramatically decreases cardiovascular risk and other cancers, mainly associated with epithelial tissues like blood vessels and stuff like that.
Are there any other nutritional strategies that can increase that, improve that, or?
Yeah, there is. You can get the supplement astaxanthin, but again, use it in conjunction, supplemental to the fatty fish intake that you're taking, right? So if you're somebody with really sensitive skin, I've done that. You have a high intake of fatty fish, the most you can stand, 3-5 days out of the week, you're eating fatty fish, seafood, and you introduce astaxanthin with those meals to increase the absorption of the astaxanthin and the composition that's already in the fish, right? Because they have to go together because there are components that make it all work, right? There are cofactors for absorption and all kinds of things like that. So yes, you could augment your fatty fish consumption, especially if you're somebody that's clearly way too sensitive, with some astaxanthin supplementation. And I would even go as far as like throw an extra fish oil pill in there. So you bump up, you make the fish more effective at that time because the fish have the cofactors.
Would the quality of food make any difference at all?
For this particular thing, probably not, but I will throw in this caveat. All canned fish are illegal to be farmed. So if you're on a budget and you're just treating this like a supplement, which is kind of how I treat it, right? It's not the thing that I enjoy eating the most. I'd rather eat steak, but I know the benefits of it, so I eat it, right? So I use canned varieties to get it in easily wherever I can. And all canned varieties of cold water fish are wild caught. In other words, the highest quality you can get. They're super cheap. And then if I want to make a nice fillet, for dinner or whatever, then I'll go out of my way and buy an actual fresh fish. At that point, a farmed fish versus a wild caught fish is not really going to make that difference unless it becomes your staple, right? Unless that's the fish that you're eating all the time. But every now and then, I wouldn't worry too much whether it's farmed or wild caught, because my main source that I use very regularly is the canned version, which are all wild caught.
Yeah, I was just thinking that when I was growing up, I wasn't really eating anything related to seafood. But then when you mentioned the canned fish, I'm like, oh yeah, we had these canned things that I loved to eat. And I'm like, probably that's why I have been so tolerant to all this. But yeah, it's definitely
because it's definitely, this is a long-term thing. Once you raise your omega-3 index to a certain point, remember, DHA is not used for fuel. It's not a fat that gets broken down and used up for fuel. It gets reserved for forming the cells in your brain, forming the cells in all your organs and throughout your whole body. And just red blood cells, for example, have a 90 to 100-day lifespan. So when you increase your omega-3 index, your blood cells have DHA integrated in them for 90 to 100 days already, right? So yes, you can once you get your omega-3 index acceptable, you can basically dial it back to maintenance dose, right? I'm only going to have one can of fish once or twice a month, and that's going to maintain your level for a long time because you're not using it up. Unless, okay, I will say this. Yes, unless you are somebody who works in technology. Go back to the episode, our previous episode on Alzheimer's and how the eye functions and what we talked about with DHA. Blue light entering the eye chronically, in other words, 12 hours a day, because that's your job, increases the need for more DHA because you're actively breaking down the DHA into all its constituents to help the repair process, just like this study showed. Mararesin 1 is a derivative of DHA that's used to combat inflammation and oxidative stress. There are others that happen in the eye. So when you expose yourself to a lot of blue light without infrared, so in other words, any artificial light other than sunlight or incandescent light bulbs, the old ones, if you expose yourself to a lot of that, you have a higher DHA requirement. So I will say that that is dependent on your lifestyle, right? If you're somebody who's just, you spend 50% of your time inside and you don't really have a tech job, you're probably going to have normal DHA demands. Now let's talk about, where was it? Oh, right here. So in this study talking about malignant melanoma, it talks about skin types 1 through 6, right? And here they are, the Fitzpatrick scale, skin type 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All of these, right? So this is what it means, okay? A lot of people, and these are the reason why I put these up. It says here, type 1, light, pale white, always burns, never tans, okay? This is a lie. This is a lie, okay? It doesn't mean that you always burn. You are probably a 1 or a 2, and you never burn. Why is that? Because of what this says in this study right here. It says that
I go from 1 to 6 in 2 days. Well, maybe sometimes 3 hours.
So you tan very quickly, right? It says here that in Cancer in 2005, we performed a world analysis of malignant melanomas over UV radiation dose by sex, age group, and Fitzpatrick skin types. Surprisingly, increasing UV doses, which represented UVB, so they're just saying the UV light that we use is UVB radiation, did not significantly correlate with increasing malignant melanoma incidence for people of any skin type. So in other words, this is a lie. This little description of always burns or usually burns or sometimes burns, that is dependent on the mechanisms that I talked about before. It depends on how you've trained your skin. Is it actually robust like it should be, like your muscles should be, right? Have you trained it to be robust? And are you always naked skin, no sunscreen on it, because that will atrophy your skin. If you are that, then it doesn't matter if you're a type 1, you're not going to burn. That's literally what they found in that study. Any skin type improve if you expose it to UVB if they did not use sunscreen.
Yes, that absolutely makes sense. I'm definitely 1, 2, and within a couple of days, it doesn't even take a couple of days for me to turn to 5, sometimes 6.
Yeah. I'm the same way, but it's the same thing.
Look at my Bahamas photos, you'll see 6 there, 100%. And I had no issues with it at all, like none. Everyone else was because they were just soaked in sunscreen. But do you have any kind of description about how sunscreen protects skin? So all it does is just protects it from mechanical damage then? And that's about it?
Yeah, that's it. So sunscreen protects it from mechanical damage, but the whole point is that's a training effect. We can train it so there isn't any mechanical damage, and then you don't have the secondary effect of the sunscreen, which is the tyrosine blocking, which is what inhibits your brain function and thyroid and metabolism and all of these things, right?
So if there's a far-fetched idea that Greek philosophers were so great because they didn't have sunscreen.
It's very possible, because where did they teach their class? Outside. Where did they observe nature? Where did they get? Remember, the creation of dopamine is done by sunlight. The more sunlight you interact with, the more dopamine you're going to create, right? And if you're eating a nice high protein diet, and high just means relative, right? Like you're not poor and impoverished, right? And you have plenty of tyrosine. Tyrosine is an amino acid. Then that means you have plenty of sunlight, plenty of tyrosine. It's going to convert into a lot of dopamine. You get more dopamine from eating meats and being outside. exactly the opposite of the modern paradigm of global warming and ESG narrative and all of that.
So what would you say to somebody who's still scared of all this and so used to sunscreens and whatnot? Would you say like, hey, maybe you can scale down, maybe you need to understand these SPF scaling and whatnot. Maybe they can use.
I would I would say first, because they are coming from that mindset, remember it is about the mind. I would say the first thing we need to do is just stop you from using sunscreen. So let's go with clothes that block sun instead, right? That way we can stop the tyrosine problem. That way, the little bit of sun I do convince you to get creates more dopamine, so that then after a little while, you can think more clearly and think for yourself. Again, I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm just presenting the evidence. It's up to you to recognize the patterns of who's actually lying to you, right? Who is actually lying to you? In order to decipher that for yourself, you need plenty of dopamine to create and sense the pattern recognition of, hey, I actually can read some of this stuff now, and I actually understand it better than I did 3 months ago. I actually think I'm going to go all out and start to train my skin to be what it should be. That's where it starts. It starts with changing this first. So the first thing is try my best to convince them that sunscreen is not a good thing. If you absolutely still feel that you need to protect the skin, I'd rather you use just clothes and go with the hybrid tanning model of go outside, get a lot of skin exposure early in the morning because you're not going to burn at all. And then in the middle of the morning, use that as your tanning session, right? Because it's a very low risk. And then in the middle of the day or the rest of the day, use clothes, use hats instead of sunscreen. That's where I would start.
Yeah, it will be, I guess for a lot of people, it would be big extreme going from using it to not using it at all because fear of being burnt and all those kind of things. Maybe some middle way of, hey, start training your skin. If you are in Bahamas all day, maybe use something very low, midday-ish, but try to get away from it as much as you can.
That's probably
where
I would
get
compromise.
A shower and go outside and get your skin exposed when it's not covered with anything at all.
And just keep it short. Keep it to 10 minutes. We
talked about massively as well about mental benefits, also physical benefits. You're gonna get stronger. You want it or not. But yeah, this is very insightful, and it's really great to see that exposure to medical journals is there. You know, everything is factual. It's not just made up stuff. And to me, it sounds as that 1975 thing was just completely flawed study and focused on, hey, how can we make money out of this?
Absolutely. Sounds like COVID.
Well, it's always money. But no, great, Dave, as usual. Appreciate your time, and we're gonna get deeper on all these things in next videos.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Have a great day.